And welcome to my channel. This is I Lit a Candle presentations for the XJW community. It's been a while since I made a little YouTube for this channel, and I have a little bit different subject that maybe you haven't heard brought up in the JW community, and that is, how safe was it going door to door? I haven't seen that specifically addressed. I can tell you, of course, I went out a little bit with my parents, but not very much. I think by the time I was about 4 or 5, they were pretty well done with going door to door. I have started kind of a series about a mystery in my life, and I'm going to have to put a hold on that for right now because I've got some legal stuff going. But I wanted to interject this subject, as I said, about the safety that Jehovah's Witnesses had. Of course, I was in the United States. I'm sure other countries there were more dangers than we had here in this country. However, I wanted to share this book I found. I was at Barnes & Noble quite some time ago, years ago, and just they had a bargain table, and I picked up this book. I want to show it to you. It is called 5 True Psychoanalytic Tales of Patients on the Edge, the 50-minute hour. And it's written by Robert Lindner with an introduction by Lloyd Siegel, MD. And it's published by MJF Books in New York. And it was first published, I believe it says 1955. And I wanted to direct you to this first story in the book. I'm not going to read it, of course, because not only is there copyright infringement possibility, but it also is very long. And the part I want to really address is not so much the part that talks about the whole story, but just about what my subject is. And as you can see, it's a little bit about mental problems with people. But let's see what you think. What do you think here? The story starts out about a guy named Charles in a city who seemed to be okay, basically. But then the third paragraph down, it says, on a certain day in a certain city, okay, anyway, of an apartment house, in one hand, a young girl, let me start over here. So a young girl stood in the hallway of an apartment house. In one hand, she carried a briefcase with samples of religious books and records. In the other, a purse and a portable phonograph. She hesitated before the panel of bells at the mailboxes, then rang one. There was no answer, so she rang a second, then a third, finally a fourth. At last, a buzzer opened the lock of the inner door. She pushed against it with her shoulder and came into a narrow foyer with a staircase in the center. As she started up the steps, a youthful voice inquired who was there. Before she reached the first landing, she saw a young man. He was standing by a partly open door looking at her. Recognizing by his youth that he could not be the head of this household, she smiled and asked if his mother were at home. He nodded, then waved his hand vaguely toward the interior of the apartment. She's in there, he said, and moved aside so she could pass. Can I see her? She asked. Sure, he replied. Go on back. She's in the bedroom. The girl entered, turned to her left, and started down a passage. Midway, she passed a small kitchen. Near the door was an icebox. On its porcelain top lay some tools. Ahead of her was the door to a bedroom. Just as she crossed the threshold, she heard a voice behind her, a noise behind her. She turned. As she did, the youth struck her on the head with a hammer. Then he stabbed her 69 times with an ice pick. Then he flung himself on the corpse and raped it. So, what does this sound like to you? To me, it sounds like a young little girl, perhaps not that little, but anyway, she sounds just like one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And this was evidently in the 40s. It's a true story. Certainly nothing we ever heard, was it? Because what I heard, and I do remember some specific assembly here and there where they talked about somebody went to a door and there was some danger, but the witness didn't know it, but then later the person who was intending to hurt them or kill them said that there were two men standing next to one of the witnesses, and as it turned out, that it was two angels because there was nobody there. So I don't know about you, but I was told more than once that we had divine protection when we went door to door. So I think this was very interesting to me to see this actually published about this particular story. It's a very long story. It is not really much about the sister or woman after this. It goes into what happened with the man. So anyway, I thought I would share some experiences, and I'm sure there are probably others of you out there that might want to think about putting them up on a YouTube. Anyway, when I was about 10, that's when I really started doing the witness thing. I had gone to the assembly in Yankee Stadium in New York, and that's when the Pink book came out, Paradise Lost to Paradise Gained, and I was going through a lot of really difficult times with my family, not as if it wasn't already difficult, but my mother had not abandoned us, but she went out to California. We were living in Ohio, and she was working, and I felt extremely abandoned and alone, and I started going to the meetings all by myself. Then I even walked in the snow at night and started doing the whole witness thing. So when I went out at that particular time, I mean, literally, I was given a few magazines. I don't even think I had a bag or anything, and just set off down the street whenever we went out. I was really afraid. I was terrified, as only other witnesses could know. At the same point, I really did care about the kingdom, and I cared about God's sovereignty and all this as young as I was. And so I started being a very regular. In fact, in all my 42 years, I was never irregular through 3 pregnancies and a lot of horrendous situations. I made sure I got that time in every month. So what happened over the years? Yeah, there were some interesting things. When we moved out to California, we moved first of all to West LA, and I was in the Santa Monica congregation, and there wasn't another single kid in the whole congregation. I don't even think there were any teenagers. It was just, people in their 20s and up, a lot of older people. And so when we went out, and of course I started going out every week, we went sometimes to Brentwood and thereabouts, and that's a very rich area. And the streets were so steep and the driveways were so steep, I think, you could practically scrape your nose on the road as you're walking up the hills there. And then you'd get to the houses. They're just really big houses. And I literally remember being so confounded trying to find the front door of a lot of them. They were very intimidating. And of course, people were intimidating. And I remember thinking, well, I'm probably at a back door, and I'm not even at the front door, which was probably true in a lot of cases. So I remember one door in particular. The man answered, and he just looked at me, and he just started laughing, and he closed the door, and he was I could hear him just laughing hysterically. So I guess I was quite a picture. Pretty ridiculous looking, this little waif going, knocking on people's doors, and I had done my little spiel, and it was, of course, very, very funny to him, very ridiculous. And another time or two, I can tell you, we were in some pretty bad neighborhoods, and I would say Hell's Angel type settings, things like that. In later years, I remember in Hemet at a circuit assembly, I was going door to door, and a woman came out with a very large butcher knife and really threatened me with it. And of course, then I was in my teens. Another time I was working, I was around 16. I was working with a brother at that particular time. And Larry, I remember his name. And I don't know if we were working a trailer park or what, but a man answered the door in his boxer shorts, and he had a t-shirt on, or some kind of shirt. But I would not have gone in, but the brother was there, so we went in because he had said, first of all, he said, "I want to tell you something about your religion." So we went in thinking we were going to have a conversation. Anyway, we sat down, and he says, "I'm from Alabama, and I want to tell you, you have the wrong religion." And he proceeded to tell us that when the war time, which wasn't that long ago at that particular time, in the 60s, he said, "We threw you witnesses, or Jehovah's, in a rattlesnake pit." And I had no reason to doubt him for the way he was talking about it. So it was something I'd never heard before. Certainly I'd heard that they'd been tarred and feathered and everything during the war, but I hadn't heard about the rattlesnake pit. Then another instance, I remember I had developed a return visit on a guy who was soldier of fortune. Who knows what might happen, but I was going there, and so much of the time I was by myself working because they had this thing that, the work was so urgent, it was so necessary to get so many territories covered and all this sort of thing that we couldn't even work together, that we had to work separately so we could get the work done faster. And I really hated that because I was pretty alone anyway, and I really preferred to have anybody to talk to as we went door to door. And I wasn't really afraid per se. It's just that it was something that I just didn't really like, going alone door to door. Another time, I remember it was later. I was probably around 15, and I was with a brother and some people, and I said he didn't like me very much for some reason. And we got close to the end of the morning, and they were going back home. He says, "I want you to get out here and work this straight, then you can walk home." Well, I'd been taught humility, so I did it. And I got a return visit on a man who I'd spoken to. And I went back, and he seemed to want to study. And about the second time or third time I was there, he started playing footsies with me. And honestly, I was just a stupid girl, young girl. Fortunately, nothing ever happened. I wasn't really interested in and I just thought he was just a nice man. So fortunately, thank goodness, nothing ever happened there. But when I look back, uh, there was a lot that really was very abusive. More than once, in fact, most of the time, I went door to door and uh, got dropped off. And, at that time we didn't carry water bottles. There was no water, there was no bathroom. Um, it could be hours. It was often about 4 hours. I was left like that. Now, when I look back, I think it was really rather abusive. So, when I consider the kind of places I went to, the kind of people I talked to, it's really almost is a wonder that nothing happened. So, I know what most JWs think about the organization and the fact that they weren't really, as it was, representing God, but perhaps some people did have some protection for some reason or another, because maybe, God took pity on some people. But actually, it's not a very safe concept. And of course, the whole thing about kind of the terror and psychological trauma you go through going door to door as a young person can definitely have a bad effect on many people. So I've just looked back on it and thought, well, it strengthened me, it made me stronger, and I can tell you the first 10 years of going door to door was really terrifying in a lot of ways. It was very hard for me to do, and I persisted. Let me tell you, I persisted. And that's the thing about witnesses, they're very, very persistent. I'd like to talk about some other aspects of this whole experience as a witness of going door to door for years and years. But one thing, I just had to share this story with you about this young girl. I've never heard of her being talked about, but obviously, especially as she had a phonograph and her little bag of tracks and things like that, I have no doubt in my mind that she was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and she never made it home. So anyway, I do share with you, and I would like to continue. And I do have a poetry channel as well. It's the Poetry of Martha Y. Wright, and you might like to look at that sometime. Also, I am going to put a few poems on this channel. Some of them are very much related to my experience as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And if you're not familiar with me, I was fourth generation. I had kids. They managed to break free. I managed to break free. But I have a lot of information, a lot of stories, and a lot of thoughts on different things. So I hope you will check in again with me, and I hope to be getting on Patreon as soon as possible. I just haven't quite figured out yet how to go about everything. So I wish you well all during this pandemic that's going on right now, and I suppose you've heard about you can drink grapefruit rind juice boiled and actually simmered, and they do have a few things now that they are using. So I wish you well, and I hope to see your YouTubes out there.